All human interactions should be free of force, fraud, and coercion, and people should be free to exercise their rights, limited only by respect for the rights of others. When you learned don't hit and don't steal, it wasn't unless you work for the government. When you learned thou shalt not kill, it wasn't unless your dear leader gives you a gun and a uniform and a one-way ticket to the other side of the world. Government is force, an opinion with a gun, and force is a poor substitute for
Aloha
persuasion.
mai kako, you are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
Welcome, this is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com. Welcome back to The New World Next Week. We give you the context and the subtext to some of the most important stories going on in your world. And we'll begin with an interesting one from the most transparent White House ever, and how they rewrote the Freedom of Information Act to suppress sensitive documents. We'll take this from the Washington Examiner, who notes that it is Sunshine Week, and as you're now viewing this, it is the first day of spring. And we'll wonder for Sunshine Week if some enterprising reporter will ask Jay Carney, the White House press whore, why Obama wrote the Freedom of Information Act without telling the rest of America. The rewrite came in an April 15th tax day here in America, of course, 2009 memo from then White House counsel Greg Craig instructing the executive branch to let White House officials review any documents sought by FOIA requesters that involved White House equities. That phrase is nowhere to be found in the FOIA, yet the Obama White House effectively amended the law to create a new exception to justify keeping public documents locked away from the public. The Gregg memo is described in detail in a new study made public by Cause of Action, a Washington-based nonprofit watchdog group that monitors government transparency and accountability. James, as always, will give all the links to all the sources cited in these episodes so you can learn more about Sunshine Week. But why would we start with such an almost seemingly mundane story? Of course the administrations lie about how open they are. What would this lead to? And I think the related stories in this first segment on this episode 186 of New World Next Week, I think kind of sheds a light on that. So before we get into perhaps Cass Sunstein, culture of misinformation, medical conspiracy theories, and Reddit, and all that much more, James, just a quick comment about FOIA documents.
Well, in fact, I was going to say much the same thing that you were, just basically that this is very much what we would expect for anyone who's really been keeping a close eye on these issues for any length of time. They know that the government is always trying to find ways to subvert freedom of information and to try to keep things locked away. And, of course, I've done numerous episodes of The Eye Opener and some of my other video reports on Obama and his so-called transparency. But let's get into those related about Cass Sunstein, because I think that's exceptionally important. And the first one that we have is one that you tweeted out, a little op-ed that Cass Sunstein wrote that appeared in the Malay Mail Online, and I'm sure other sources besides. Let's talk a little bit about that.
It's called Everywhere You Look, There's Conspiracy Afoot. And I'll just read the brief first couple of sentences. Conspiracy theories surround us, writes Cass Sunstein. Witness the reactions on the internet to the tragic and mysterious disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Ukraine, NSA, assassinations of national leaders, recent economic crises, the authorship of Shakespeare's plays. It's child's play to assemble a host of apparent clues and to connect a bunch of dots to support a relevant conspiracy theory. And he asks, why do people accept such theories? So we'll thank Lisa Pease, actually, for jumping on the tweets on this and commenting, and we'll include links to that as well. And Cass Sunstein actually did a conspiracy-related AMA, Ask Me Anything, on Reddit. James, why do these conspiracy theories persist, and why do people ask questions? Is it because we're constantly lied to and kept in the dark about things that pertain to us? So another one making the rounds today, and of course it's funny how it all kind of goes together in the zeitgeist. Another one making the rounds, it's on NPR, it's on all the major, almost kind of faux progressive sites. Half of Americans believe in medical conspiracy theories, and they go on to poo-poo all those idiots out there questioning vaccines and all of those sorts of things. So, James, gosh, why would people believe in medical conspiracy theories? Could it be perhaps maybe about the Tuskegee or Guatemala syphilis experiments, or what do you got?
Yeah, the actual medical conspiracies that have been proven to have taken place in the past. Could that inform our views of what's taking place right now? Oh, perhaps. And it's interesting if people go and read that Cass Sunstein op-ed, if they can hold their nose and hold the bile back in their throat long enough to get through it. I mean, it does throw out all of the old canards that we would expect, talking about, oh, maybe aliens did Flight 370, as if that's, that's the serious conspiracy theory that's being bandied about. And of course it is, as always, just trying to tar everyone with the same brush and trying to make everything sound like this one big hodgepodge of craziness that's not based on any facts. And I will tip my hat to @LightViper on Twitter for also tweeting out Cass Sunstein is working on a new book about conspiracy theories and linking to a Bloomberg TV report. Federal Reserve is not a conspiracy, says Cass Sunstein, and I hope people will go and watch that because it relates very much to what I'm working on my Federal Reserve documentary, which was a proven, admitted conspiracy by the conspirators who 30 years after the fact, wrote editorials about how they conspired on Jekyll Island to form the Federal Reserve. It's an openly admitted conspiracy, and here's Cass Sunstein coming along to tell you you're crazy if you believe that. So it just goes right in the face of facts, but I think that's the point. Basically, they're getting people to divide up into teams. You're not going to go out on that fringe conspiracy branch, are you? You know that's just craziness, and only crazy people hang out on that branch. Well, if people like Cass Sunstein are attempting to define where I can't go, cognitively speaking, I think I'll be happy to ignore him and his cronies. And I think that the LA Times article you cite there, nearly half of Americans subscribe to a medical conspiracy theory. I think that's actually a good sign. I think, hey, that means we're winning because it means more and more people are tuning out of the mainstream garbage and are trying to think for themselves. And not everyone is right about all of the conspiracy theories they come up with, but at any rate, I'm glad that people are questioning the authority and looking into these facts for themselves. And I can tell from my own firsthand experience that Rockefeller Medicine is one of the most popular episodes of my podcast I've come out with in a long time, because a lot of people do know that we have been lied to, medically speaking, for a long time. So we're winning. People like Cass Sunstein are panicking. No one's going to buy his ridiculous book, and no one on Reddit seemed to be believing his Ask Me Anything. So I think we are definitely winning this battle for information.
Just as at a quick glance, I saw on Reddit, most of the people were like, "Who is this guy? What the crap is he even talking about? He doesn't seem to know what he's doing." The last related James will include comes from, I think, the only Congress critter worth anything is our Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, who says the CIA is, quote, embedded in a culture of misinformation. So again, just bringing it full circle of why people ask questions is because they're lied to and fed misinformation and disinformation by the very folks we supposedly employ and pay for. Now, James, having said that, we'll move with quite a difference to our second story this week. And it comes from Slate, and it's on my Twitter feed @Media Monarchy. The first reporter to write a story on the LA earthquake Monday on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th, was not a person. Ken Schwenke, a journalist and programmer for the Los Angeles Times, was jolted awake 6:25 a.m. Monday by an earthquake. He rolled out of bed, went straight to his computer where he found a brief story about the quake already written and waiting in his system. He glanced over it, hit publish, and that's how the Los Angeles Times became the first media outlet to report on the Monday quake. He says we thought they had it up in about 3 minutes. And it appeared under Ken Schwenke's byline, but the real author was an algorithm called QuakeBot. He developed it a little over 2 years ago. Whenever an alert comes in from the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, about an earthquake of a certain size threshold, QuakeBot is programmed to extract the relevant data from the USGS report and plug it into a pre-written template. That story then goes into the Times content management system where it awaits review and publication by a human editor. By noon Pacific time on Monday, QuakeBot's story had been updated 71 times by humans, turning it into an in-depth front-page story. QuakeBot is not the first of its kind at the Los Angeles Times. Schwenke and his colleagues on the paper's data team modeled it on a similar bot that generates automatic reports about homicides in the paper's coverage area. James, I find this fascinating.
Well, you're not the only one, but I guess as a point of fact, although the LA Times might have been the first to come out with it in print, of course, we all know it was KTLA that was reporting it live on air. And, oh, what? There's an earthquake! There's an earthquake! With that famous viral video of the reporter on air with that. But yes, this is an interesting story because it points out that something that I think is developing in the entire world of journalism right now, which is a separation that's forming between just the data itself, the raw data that people report on, and the analysis of the stories. And the raw data, algorithms and computers are great at correlating that and putting it, and now they're even starting to put it semantically into sentences that can be read by human beings. So we are on the cusp of really. I don't fear this. I don't think it's a bad thing. This is just like anything else. It's just something that could be used for good or evil, I suppose. But in this case, I think it can be used for some very helpful things. For example, there was that story recently of that app that came out that will now live send a message to your iPhone or your slave device of choice every time there's a drone strike, an American drone strike anywhere in the world, so you can keep up to date with the latest death and carnage in the phony war on terror. So again, there are some useful ways to put this to work. And there was something that I mentioned in my presentation on open source journalism. It was a 2006 article by Adrian Holovati, called A Fundamental Way Newspaper Sites Need to Change. And I suggest people go and have a read through that because it is an interesting article about this idea of using data as a new way of presenting journalism. Stories that are about the data itself, the underlying data, so that a story about an earthquake can be about the location, the strength of the earthquake, the intensity, the number of seconds that it lasted, the aftershocks, all of that data can be categorized and laid out in a way like this QuakeBot, I suppose, does. So again, it's an interesting development, and again, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, just as long as we keep it in perspective that, again, we do need the humans to contextualize this data.
I in a way, I'm almost more fascinated about what kind of reports it would generate about homicides, but we'll have to save that for a different time or my own research, perhaps. Our third and final story this week, James, comes via the Daily Mail as UK scientists hidden links to GMO food giants exposed. The authors of a study calling for GMO crops to be fast-tracked into Britain's farms and kitchens all have links to the industry. The report was presented as the work of independent scientists and was published by a government advisory body. It was used to support a bid to speed up the development of the controversial crops in the UK, but it emerged that all 5 authors have a vested interest in promoting GMO crops and foods, and some are even part funded by that industry. And you can get the story, and we do name the names. Professor Sir David Balcom, he works for Syngenta. Professor Jonathan Jones, he gets all his money from the government. Professor Jim Dunwell, involved with CropGen. Professor John Pickett, involved heavily in GM research and even destroying other folks' anti-GM research. And Professor Puig Domenech, who co-chairs events sponsored and paid for by Monsanto, Bayer, and DuPont, and will include some of the other news stories about those scientists saying we need to, speed up GM crops in the UK, and dismissing the conspiracy theorists as having a neurosis, and as well links to their PDFs and the pages that they actually wrote and have been stamped by the government. So, James, this is just another example of, to put it very simply, it's a conflict of interest.
Yes, or one might even say a conspiracy. Exactly right. And just to give people an idea of the mindset of this, I'll turn to one of my favorite sources on the GM topic, gmwatch.org, which always has very interesting articles, and just one that came out a few weeks ago, The Infanticide Advocate Promoting Golden Rice, which says, quote, Peter Singer, the Princeton University professor who wrote Animal Liberation, the book said to have inspired the modern animal rights movement, has just written an article promoting golden rice and GMOs. The article also also gives a hat tip to Patrick Moore's Golden Rice campaign that seeks to blame Greenpeace and its allies for the death of vitamin A deficient children. In his article, Singer presents himself as Mr. Reasonable, as well as having historically been very cautious about GM. But what Singer doesn't tell his readers is that he has long thrown caution to the wind when it comes to the uses of biotech. Thus, in his 2002 overview of the politics of transhumanism, Singer writes, "Writings on the permissibility of euthanizing certain disabled newborns inspired howls of outrage and accusations of fascism, but the Singer also argues, we must employ the new genetic and neurological sciences to identify and modify the aspects of human nature that cause conflict and competition." So here we have this transhumanist promoting, infanticide promoting, bestiality promoting. That's another one of his little gems that he's come out with in one of his books, Dearest Pet on Bestiality. Again, just the craziness behind some of the people who are promoting this, and now he again is claiming the moral high ground because if you're not for golden rice, then you're for killing vitamin A deficient children. Which of course there is. Golden rice is a failed technology at this point. It has not actually produced what it said it's going to produce. But on a positive note, I think people are more and more waking up to this and more demanding action on this very subject. And on that note, I'll throw it over to acbio.org.za, which is the African Center for Biosafety, which had a press release just a couple of days ago. Monsanto forced to withdraw unsubstantiated advertising claims on benefits of GM crops. Advertising Standards Authority of South Africa, which is a great story about how basically the Advertising Standards Authority of South Africa is making Monsanto retract claims from its website that it does not prove about how they help the GM crops enable us to produce more food sustainability while using fewer resources, blah, blah, blah. All of the same PR garbage that has absolutely no science for it, and in fact a lot of science against it. And Monsanto is finally, in South Africa of all places, is finally being taken to task for spouting this PR crap on their website. So the baby steps are being made, but unfortunately, very powerful, very rich, very well-funded sources are arrayed against us in this fight, and they are trying to shove this GM crap down your throat. So I think people need to be aware of this and need to be exposing the ties and speaking out against this agenda at every possible opportunity in every possible forum, including in your own daily life and choosing what you put in your own body, and to the extent possible, mitigating that as much as possible.
Well, and again, to bring it full circle, that kind of sounds like it's a medical conspiracy. So the related, and to further back up what you were just saying, bugs have already evolved immunity to GM corn. A study published on St. Patrick's Day shows the beetle larvae developed resistance to now 2 strains, of course, because of the over-reliance and improper implementation of pesticides coming from Big Ag. And we'll thank wearethird.net for the anti-GMO shirt. And just quickly mention, James, as we wrap this episode up, some of our other updates and stories that we've been covering recently on New World Next Week. As of just a couple of hours ago, and possibly the story will change by the time you're watching this, but probably not, the Australian Prime Minister says satellite imagery found objects related possibly to Flight 370. And James will include your latest episode, How to Steal an Airplane from 9/11 to Flight 370. More bankers jumping off of buildings, 12th bankster suicide this year, thanks to @BrockWest on Twitter. @Petra Kramer points out how Cold War hungry neocons stage managed Liz Wall's resignation from RT. And of course, folks using hashtag New World Next Week to get us stories like UK nuclear power station taken offline over fears of Fukushima-style disaster, and revealed the Ministry of Defense secret cyber warfare program. And also, James, the last word for me, I was recently on the Ripple Effect podcast, and that is now posted, and more media coming from Media Monarchy.
Excellent stuff. I hope people are subscribed to the feeds there, and hopefully we're still working on the New World Next Week feed.
We are.
All right. Excellent. Well, hopefully we'll have that for you guys very soon. Thank you again, newworldnextweek.com. James Evan Pilato, thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much.
The European and American public are being systematically lied to about the Ukraine crisis. In this video, we're going to provide you with compelling evidence that the crimes against humanity committed in Kiev earlier this year were in fact committed by the new coalition government, and that officials in the EU and the United States knew full well who committed these crimes, and that they are protecting and financially supporting the real criminals. On February 20th of 2013, the world was shocked by video footage of snipers firing on protesters in Kiev, Ukraine. 21 people were murdered, and it was widely assumed that President Viktor Yanukovych and his supporters were behind the attacks. However, a phone conversation between EU Foreign Policy Chief Cathy Ashton and Estonia's Foreign Minister Urmas Paet, which was leaked to the public on March 5th, reveals that the snipers were actually from the new coalition government, and that Western diplomats knew this and covered it up.
Yeah.
So that he has some sort of, how to say, trust among all these Maidan people and civil society. And second, what was quite disturbing, the same Olga told that, well, all the evidence shows that people who were killed by snipers from both sides, among policemen and people from the streets, that they were the same snipers killing people from both sides.
Well, that's.
So that, and then she also showed me some photos. She said that has medical doctor. She can, say that it is the same handwriting, the same type of bullets, and it's really disturbing that now the new coalition that they don't want to investigate what exactly happened. So that there is now stronger and stronger understanding that behind snipers it was not Yanukovych, but it was somebody from the new coalition.
For some reason, the US media didn't think that little detail was worth covering. But wait, I thought the opposition protesters were just peaceful activists who wanted a chance to join the European Union. Well, yeah, that's the official narrative that the US media outlets are peddling. But the real story is far more ominous. It turns out that the most powerful and influential contingent in the opposition is a coalition of literal fascists and neo-Nazis. And they aren't peaceful. In fact, they're extremely brutal. The most prominent among these extremist groups is an organization called Svoboda. The Svoboda Party, which traces its roots to the Ukrainian Partisan Party of World War II, was loosely allied with Nazi Germany. Until 2004, Svoboda had been called the Social Nationalist Party, a deliberate reference to the National Socialism of the Nazis. And we're not throwing the term neo-Nazi around here as an empty slur. The leader of Svoboda, Oleg Tanibok, has openly targeted Jews and ethnic Russians in Ukraine for many years. In 2004, he was kicked out of Viktor Yushchenko's government for a speech calling for Ukrainians to fight against a, quote, Muscovite Jewish mafia. And in 2005, he signed his name to an open letter to the leadership of Ukraine entitled, Stop the Criminal Activities of Organized Jewry. And none of this was a secret. The BBC was already reporting on the danger that Svoboda's rise posed back in 2012. And the EU passed a resolution that same year condemning Svoboda as, quote, racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic. Yet somehow the US government thought it was appropriate to back these extremists. This is a picture of Victoria Nuland from the U.S. State Department meeting with Oleg Tanibok in February. And this is a picture of Senator John McCain sharing a stage with Tanibok in December. But why would the U.S. government work with neo-Nazis? Because they thought that they could control the situation. They thought that they could install their puppets behind the scenes and manipulate the situation in their favor. That same Victoria Nuland who met with Svoboda in February was caught on another leaked call discussing who they would put in power.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking, in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tanibok and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tanibok on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay.
The mainstream media tried to draw your attention away from the important part of that conversation by focusing on the fact that she used a cuss word when referring to the EU.
Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, I saw that.
He's now gotten both Sari and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Sari could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
The U.S. government thought that they could control this beast, but they were wrong. Svoboda and the right sector are not toys to be played with. These groups are armed, they're forceful, and they view this crisis as an opportunity to reshape Ukraine in their own image. This video shows a prominent leader from the right sector, Alexander Muzichko, brandishing an AK-47 in Parliament, letting them know who's in charge. This is the same Alexander Muzichko who's made public statements in the past vowing to, quote, fight against Jews, communists, and Russian scum for as long as he lives.
As long as I live, I will fight against Jews, communists, and Russian scum.
Apparently, the US government has been a little slow to catch on to the fact that their hand has been exposed. In March, a senior US official told Reuters that, quote, since entering the Ukrainian parliament in October of 2012, the Svoboda leadership has been working to take their party in a more moderate direction and to become a modern European mainstream political party. The leadership has been much more vigilant about expelling or otherwise punishing individual members who engage in xenophobic behavior or rhetoric. Oh, so it's okay to use known neo-Nazi groups to topple a government as long as their leaders keep their people from saying anything stupid in front of cameras for a few months. The reality of the matter is that, as ridiculous as this position makes Washington look, they're trapped. They can't deny that Svoboda and right sector are running the coalition government when Svoboda holds 5 senior posts, including the deputy prime minister position. And the right sector's Dmitry Yarosh is now the country's deputy secretary of national security. But what about that dramatic video, I Am Ukrainian, that went viral as the crisis was unfolding? It was so compelling, so heart-wrenching. Yeah, but who made it? A whisper to a roar. Who are these people? Oh look, a link in the description. Let's click it. They have a website and a behind-the-scenes section. Oh, it lists the filmmakers. Who's this here? Larry Diamond, inspiration and executive producer. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the National Endowment for Democracy, and he's an advisor for the U.S. State Department. You know the funny thing about the National Endowment for Regime Change, Democracy, is that even though they call themselves an NGO, they get virtually all of their money from the U.S. federal government. You can easily verify this by downloading their annual financial disclosures. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that the NED has been pouring massive amounts of money into Ukraine to, quote, strengthen democracy and civil society. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Democracy, civil society. Of course, by now you've realized that when they talk about spreading democracy, what they really mean is regime change. And they are willing to work with the most despicable elements when it's expedient. This is exactly the same game as they played in Syria. The U.S. government funded known extremists, literal terrorist organizations who have been documented massacring whole towns. And even after those extremists used sarin gas on thousands of civilians and got caught by the UN, Washington still covered for them. Even to this day, they are still funding those murderers. They are still training them. And they are still sending them weapons. There's a word for that. State-backed terrorism. But the situation in Ukraine didn't unfold as planned. The Parliament of Crimea in the south of Ukraine voted to secede. And they're putting the decision up for a public referendum on March 16th. The U.S. government claims that this referendum is unconstitutional and says that they won't recognize Crimea's decision as legitimate regardless of the outcome. So a foreign-backed neo-Nazi coup which takes control of the government without a vote is constitutional, but a declaration of independence placed to a general vote is not? Seriously, that's the best you guys can do? Who writes these scripts? Take a step back and look at the pattern. The real stakes of this drama are much bigger than Ukraine or Syria. And these are not random or isolated events. We are witnessing the final stages of a geopolitical chess game that is designed to end in war. But in order to get that war, they need to convince you, the public, that they didn't see this coming. They need you to believe that the other side was the aggressor. They're counting on you not paying attention to the fact that Obama signed an order targeting Russia with sanctions this past week and revoking the visas of a number of Russian diplomats. They're counting on you not noticing that Russia had warned that such a move would result in Russia dropping the dollar and encouraging others to do so as well. Oh, and did I mention that China is on Russia's side in this conflict? The same China who keeps our economy afloat by loaning us more and more money. That's a brilliant idea. Start an economic war with China. These people are counting on you to be too naive to realize that economic warfare invites physical warfare. They're playing chicken with your children's future, and they think you're too stupid to connect the dots. Prove them wrong. We highly recommend that you verify the information presented here for yourself. In the description, you'll find a link to a page on our website which lists all of our sources. If you'd like to keep up with what's really going on in the world, go to our website, scgnews.com, and sign up for email updates. If you sign up for these updates, you'll get notified of any new articles or videos that we put out. And this is important because we're able to put out a lot more content covering a lot more topics in article format than we are in video. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, by searching for Storm Clouds Gathering or SCG News.
You come forward, American Constitution. 1913, corrupting the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer. He can see you lying in your eyes. You know can hide from Judge Jesus Christ. Hallelujah. No